The Big 12 is one of the craziest conference so far this season, and no different here just the other night. Kansas gets their 5th win of the season against TCU, the number 3rd team in the nation, beats out a team also in the top 25. The score 63-58. This was a fantastic game, and of course, Jalen Wilson does what Jalen Wilson does. This kid's going to be special in the NBA, and he's doing special things right in front of our eyes for the Jayhawks. Welcome into Slasher U. I'm your host, Christian Rao, here with my co-host, Steve Feck. We are going to break down this game in the Big 12. We have so much to talk about this conference as there's multiple teams ranked. And we want to ask the question, does there need to be a cap on how many teams in a certain conference makes the tournament? We're going to dig into that a little bit later on. But first, Steve, this was a fantastic game, 63-58. What was your thoughts on this one? And of course, what was your thoughts on Jalen Wilson?
Yeah. Well, I mean, on one hand, I was really excited to watch this game because it was a tough, hard-nosed, really, it was a very tough defensive struggle. But, especially in the early going, I don't know if you remember the South Park episode when the kids were playing baseball and they didn't want to really play anymore, but the parents wanted them to keep playing. So they tried to find ways not to score runs and not to win, but somehow one team always seemed to win every time. That's the kind of the impression I sort of got with this game. Kansas just by accident, sort of won this game. I mean, Grady Dick had 9 of the first 12 points. And TCU didn't score in the first 5 minutes of the first half. So thank God. These are teams that play good defense anyway. But it was kind of a tough thing to start with. Yeah, Jalen Wilson is great, but Grady Dick won this game early because he scored. He got hot early. He was the only one that seemed to be able to put the ball in the hoop on any kind of consistent basis. So,
yeah, I should probably flip my words a little bit so it doesn't get a little skewed here. Jalen Wilson, obviously, when I say what he does is incredible, it wasn't with the basket. It wasn't with the points in this one. He actually did struggle with his shot, but he still found ways to contribute in this one. And we saw that in a couple games beforehand too, where he would score 40 points. The next game he would struggle, but his team would step up. Jalen Wilson still had 13 rebounds, although he only had 7 points. He really contributed in all the minutes he faced, those 33 minutes. But yeah, you're correct. You're absolutely right. Grady Dick really did step up in this one, 19 points. That's another guy who's rising up in the NBA draft stocks, and we're going to see him in the professional league too. It's crazy that he's only a freshman because he has a very sweet shot, especially from the outside.
Yeah, I really wish that Grady Dick would resist the temptation of the big contract.
Yeah, so hard.
And draft. I think at least one more year, and then if you want, you want to declare. But he's a guy that I could see if he came out as a junior, he would be a top 3, top 5 pick. He has that much talent. It's really hard when scouts are telling you, and all your buddies and even teammates are telling you, hey, look, hey, you're an NBA player. You're an NBA player. He is, but he's not going to realize his potential by the time his rookie contract runs out. And then you're struggling to try to find a team where you're going to fit in. You've got more Grady Dicks behind you. So, but I really hope that he does not declare for the draft. I hope that he does decide to stick around at least another season, because I think with one more season, he's going to be super special pro.
I also agree with you, but he screams one and done to me because I think that he's a fringe lottery pick, in my opinion. I think that there's a true chance that he's a lottery pick this year alone. And we've seen that a lot with Kansas players being one and done. So as much as I agree with you and love to see him play for the Jayhawks one more year, I think we're going to see this the last month or so of him in a Kansas Jayhawk uniform. It could be longer than a month because this team obviously is destined for greatness. We're seeing some fantastic things from the Jayhawks this year, 23-5. They're the 3rd ranked team in the country right now. And it doesn't seem like they're slowing down anytime soon. They took care of TCU in this one. They took care of Baylor easily in the game beforehand. Now they go on to face West Virginia, who's also a very interesting team this year. But if you look at the standings, you wouldn't believe that. If you didn't watch any Big 12 basketball this year and then you just pay attention to West Virginia or you saw them in the standings, you would say, okay, they're struggling. But that's really not the case. According to a lot of bracketology, they are one of the ones that are sitting in the last 4 right now is West Virginia. Mm-hmm. That's crazy because if you look at that, they're currently 8th in the Big 12. So that brings to my next point here, Steve. We have 6 teams in the Big 12 that are currently ranked in the top 25. Oklahoma State sits in 7th place at 7-8 overall conference, but still 16-12 record. And you have West Virginia at a 16-12 record, but their conference record's a little lower than that. West Virginia still sits in some bracketology saying, yeah, they're going to make the tournament still. Are we going to see 8 teams hit the Big 12 in March Madness? Is that going to happen?
Well, I mean, I could see a scenario where they do get 8 teams in. I think now, let's say an Oklahoma State or a West Virginia or even a TCU would win the Big 12 tournament. Now I think that suddenly changes, the discussion a little bit, and maybe a team like Iowa State would get bumped out of the tournament because an unexpected team won the Big 12 tournament. But that's why, off camera, you and I were talking, and I said, wouldn't it be interesting to put caps on how many teams from every conference could make the NCAA tournament? And especially now we're going to kind of jump a little bit over and talk about the women's game just real briefly. This is probably the finest season of women's basketball that we have ever witnessed, as far as top to bottom. It really is. So now you truly have a deep well of teams that you can draw your tournament teams from. But also now you can now reestablish the NIT and the WNIT as a legitimate, sought-after basketball tournament, the way it had been through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Now, for an old guy like me who grew up and could get on a train as a 7 or 8-year-old and go to the Garden and watch the NIT, I mean, the NIT in a lot of ways had some of the more interesting teams and players than even the NCAA tournament. It had Pete Maravich, it had Bob Lanier, it had Calvin Murphy. And again, for all you kiddies, you might need to look these guys up. But I mean, these guys were big time players, but they weren't necessarily at the big power schools like North Carolina and Kentucky. So and even the early St. John's teams of Louis Carnesecca, they kind of made a name for themselves. Bobby Knight, when he was at Army, had his teams in the NIT, and later Mike Krzyzewski did that. So you could potentially, by putting that cap on teams, you could create 2 really viable conferences, just like you have bowl games. Every football team wants to go to one of the NY6 bowls, but it doesn't mean that if you have a good season, you can't go to a bowl in Orlando or the Sun Bowl in El Paso or one of the quote unquote lesser bowls, and be able to go on a national stage and have people start paying attention to you as a player, because you're going to get overlooked by all the other power conferences.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. You bring that up. Now, it would definitely bring a lot more poise and a lot more respect, a lot more interest into NIT and tournament like that. But then you got to think at the flip side right now. They want to expand the NCAA tournament. So as much as I think the cap would be interesting, and I think we both can agree that this isn't going to happen, but when you expand it, we might be talking not only 8 teams making it for the Big 12 conference. There might be a time where a conference like the Big 12 gets everybody involved. So there you go, Oklahoma. There's your chance. No, interesting. It's a very interesting conference. The Big 12, and just like football, we said that a lot when we were talking college football this year, is one of the deepest conferences in all of college sports, especially when it came to football. And then we have to say it when it comes to college basketball this year, especially in the men's side. They are one of the conferences that have that play into March before they start their conference tournament. The conference tournament doesn't start until March 8th. So we still have a lot of basketball to start maybe moving the dots around, start untangling a few things. But however, when you look at it right now, you have 4 teams in the top 15 from this conference. Kansas sits at 3, Texas sits at 8, Baylor 9, Kansas State 14. You can basically assure, even as at-large bids, that those 4 are pretty much locks. Now you look at Iowa State, TCU, they got to make some noise in their own tournament, I would think, to make sure that they have a spot. However, they're probably safe. Then we talk about Oklahoma State, West Virginia. They're pretty close. They have to do a lot of things. You basically have to guarantee a conference win or maybe get all the way to the conference championship for you to get yourself in. I think 6 is the guarantee. I think we're going to see 6 make it for the Big 12, possibly 7 if we have a lot of upsets in the tournament. That's where I'm going to stick my number at, is 6, possibly 7, Steve.
I think that's the more realistic, practical way that's going to happen. Now, you could also argue, well, wait a minute, it just should be the best teams in the country going into the tournament. It doesn't matter what conference they're in, but then you are starting to see some of your mid majors and some schools that have worked hard, and maybe you're in a conference. Let's say the WCC. St. Mary's deserves a bid. No matter what Gonzaga's doing, St. Mary's has earned a bid this year. So that's going to be a 2-bid conference. So that whittles away at maybe going 8 deep or even 7 deep out of the Big 12, or a conference like the SEC or the Big 10, or I think both of those conferences could probably see 5 teams get in, depending on how everything would fall out down the stretch here. But you talked about the NCAA expanding the tournament. In essence, by boosting up the NITs for both the men's and the women's. And the NCAA is going to have to address the women's game is exploding. They're going to have to address a way to get more eyes fixed on women. The NIT, the finals, the Final Four of the NIT every year is played at Madison Square Garden. And not to be an East Coast New York snob about it, when you think college basketball, that's where everybody wanted to play, was Madison Square Garden, whether you were playing in the holiday tournaments,
Right.
Over Thanksgiving and Christmas, or you were playing NIT. That was a big thing. That's college basketball. On the women's side, you have a really strong interest there in Eastern Pennsylvania, New York State, New Jersey, certainly Connecticut. So if you have an NIT, you're going to have hardcore fans of women's basketball having an easy drive down to Manhattan, or you even take the train because you get up and just go up the escalators and you're there in the garden, from Penn Station. You have a built-in audience that's going to also make it seem even more exciting for the television audience, and that draws them in too. So that's, for me, that's the solution I'm proposing. Forget going to 96 or whatever hell number they were at. Was it 84? Was that the last number?
I've seen both. I've seen both numbers, 84 and 96.
But rather than do that, okay, take those other teams and make 2 exciting postseason runs. You're gonna basically come very close to overshadowing the NFL draft if you've got 2 tournaments. Well, actually 4 tournaments, two women's, 2 men's. You're going to basically wipe out all the opening day excitement for baseball, because all of the focus is going to be on college basketball. So for me, that's a moneymaker. And one other thing that you need to think about now, again, with football, a lot of the bigger schools changing conferences, that's driven by football and its revenues involved with football. But for basketball only schools, or where basketball is the premier program in your school, some of the smaller schools, it's going to basically prevent conference hopping, because now, do you really want to jump to, let's say, a 1 or 2 steps above where you are now in your conference, where maybe now if there's caps, maybe you won't get a tournament bid? Or do you want to stay in your conference and basically guarantee yourself, if you're not getting into the NCAAs, you're getting into the NIT? So I think there's a lot of advantages for college basketball to have the NITs propped up by putting a cap on all the conferences about the maximum number of teams from each conference, because now you're going to have these smaller schools, but they're going to be still playing Power 5 schools in this tournament.
We could dream. And I think that would be a fantastic idea. Obviously, I don't know if that is going to happen, because we know money's involved. That's why teams like UCLA and USC are heading to the Big Ten. But if there wasn't a whole bunch of money involved and the stipulations that you just mentioned were on the line, would a team like USC and UCLA head to the Big Ten when they know they can be at least in the top 5 to get their cap in the Pac-12 every single year? That might not happen. in the Big Ten when it comes into basketball. You never know. So let us know your thoughts in the comment description below. What do you think about this game between Kansas and TCU? How many teams do you think are going to make it into the Big 12, from the Big 12 into March Madness? And if you're a team that's on the fringe for the NIT, what do you feel about that? Do you feel the NIT is still a prominent tournament? Do you think it's still worth watching? We definitely do. But I wouldn't let your thoughts. So let us know. And then what do you think about Steve's idea about putting a cap on the amount of teams in a conference that can make March Madness? Do you think 5 is a good number? Do you have a different number? You think it's just a stupid idea? Let us know in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe while you're there. And thanks for watching SlasherU.